Hello, welcome back to the second part of my exclusive interview with vibraphonist Gary Burton here live at the Blue Note here in New York City. Gary Burton's won 6 Grammys throughout his career, and 2 of his musical partnerships that have really kind of catapulted his career was one with the late saxophonist Stan Getz, as well as pianist and composer Chick Corea. One of your most important partnerships, and I guess musicianships, was with the legendary Stan Getz. Mm-hmm. You came fresh out of Berklee, and this had to be very, very mind-boggling for you because you played with him and you also played with George Shearing.
Right, I started with Shearing. I came from Berklee, moved to New York, and within a few months, Marian McPartland, in fact, recommended me to George. And because George, had a band that actually had vibraphone in the band as a regular instrument, and not many bands did, or do even to this day. And so that was a good opportunity for me. So she recommended me to George, and I worked for him for a year, and then he decided to disband and stay home for a while. So I found myself back in New York wondering what to do next, and the phone rang, and it turned out to be a call from Stan, actually from his bass player, who was a friend of mine, that Stan was looking for a piano player but hadn't found anyone, and time was getting short. There was a tour going to start in a week or two, and somebody had recommended me and mentioned that I played with 4 mallets, and maybe that would substitute for a piano. And Stan wondered if I would, come down and sit in with him and give it a try, see what it sounded like.
The standout is that live album you did with Mr. Beto. And I think when you guys did Summertime, mm-hmm. that kind of put you quintessentially on the map musically because it really enhanced what Stan was trying to do musically.
Well, I was trying to capture, to some extent, the guitar stylings of Bossa Nova comping. We didn't have a guitar in the band, and the guitar is a very basic instrument in Bossa Nova rhythm sections. So I was trying my best to kind of capture some of that style of playing. And that record we made probably just a few months after I joined the band. In fact, I remember at the time feeling like I really wasn't ready to, see the group recording quite yet because we hadn't been playing together that long, and we were still coming up with tunes to play and so on. But circumstances were that it was the moment they wanted to have this record made. It was called Getz Go-Go. It was right here in New York at the Cafe Go-Go that we did it.
What was it like working with her, Stan? I mean, that was a fantastic band, but you guys said so much in so little time. That had to be very hard.
It was a great experience working with Stan, and also a kind of a challenge of an experience. Stan was this strange mixture of great talent and but a guy with a very messed up life. He was a serious alcoholic during the years I worked for him. Earlier in his life, he had been a serious drug addict, and so he went through lots of sort of personality ups and downs. Some days he would be angry and you know, really nasty to be around. Other days he'd be as sweet and nice as could be, and you never knew what kind of situation you were going to run into from day to day with him. And some days he played great, some days he was played very poorly because he would be too drunk to really be at his best. But for me, it was a great learning experience. He was such a major star, and it was at a high point in his career as well. So we were playing all the best concert halls and clubs and made movies and touring all over the world and so on. So for somebody who was, I had just turned 21, I think, the year I started with Stan, this was a fantastic opportunity. I mean, it was suddenly I found myself at the very top of the jazz world in his band, and the trials and tribulations of it seemed easy to handle given the benefits that I was getting from it.
You and Chick Corea go back late 60s, and your partnership with him and your chemistry, it's timeless. It seems like you guys were really born to play together, but the first time you guys played together, it wasn't happening.
Right. I had a band in the late 60s, and it was time to get a new player in the band, and the other two guys in the group, Roy Haynes and Steve Swallow, both recommended Chick. And I knew who he was. We hadn't played together before. I'd met him once. But I said, sounds like a good idea to me. And Chick joined the band, and we played together for 3 or 4 months or so, doing enough gigs that we could tell whether this was working out or not. And it just never seemed to quite settle in and gel. We seemed like we were constantly in each other's way, and if we held back and played fairly reserved, then it worked, but then we weren't really able to play with the full, passion that we wanted to play with. So there was a break in the schedule, and I remember we sat down and talked about it and agreed that it hadn't worked out the way we had expected it to. We all thought this was going to be a real dream band,
He went to play with Miles Davis, right. And then that's when you decided to put your new band together, which was another guitarist that entered your band.
Right. Jerry Hahn was the next guitar player that came in the band, and I didn't really think about playing with Chick again. We had given it a try, and it hadn't been terrible, but it just hadn't clicked for us. But then a few years later, an opportunity came along. We were both playing on a jazz festival in Munich, and the promoter wanted some kind of finale to the concert. So he went around asking the musicians that were on the festival that night if they would take part in a jam session of some kind. And a lot of people don't like to play jam sessions. I usually don't myself. But at any rate, on that one night, it turned out that only 2 of us had said yes, we would do it. It was me and Chick. So when we found out it was just the two of us, we laughed and said, well, what the heck, we can play some tune together. And we did, and it was a big hit with the audience. And it seemed to click musically in a way that hadn't worked the first time we tried to play. So that led to, a few months later, going into the studio to make what we thought would be a one-time project, do one record together for the heck of it. And that was Crystal Silence, came out in 1973. And ever since then, we just have kept on playing. It's been 38 years now. We play every year, a tour here, a tour there. We make a record every few years, and we're still enjoying it. We're already booking our next tour next spring, and our next record project we'll do then as well.
and Roy Ayers came out. Roy went in another direction with the fusion soul, and you just stayed with the progressive traditional quintet, and you did a little fusion here and there also. What exactly were you guys trying to say at the time? Because the late 60s music was changing, especially jazz.
Well, there's always a desire with most younger players to find your own voice. And coming out of the 1950s, going into the 60s, jazz had settled into a fairly static stylistic area. We were in the end of the bebop era, and Miles had introduced kind of blue, which was a change from the bebop tunes, but it was still almost everything was syncopated swing time and certain kinds of harmonic structures that were very similar to show tunes, for instance, and either blues forms or show tunes. So the harmony progressions were a familiar kind of song style that had been in jazz for decades. And when I came along and I left Stan's band and started my own group, I felt a real pull to say, well, where's my sound? Where's my audience? And I recognized that playing with Stan and Shearing, I looked out at the audience. I was in my early 20s, but all the audience were in their 40s. And I said, if this is my audience, by the time I'm in my 40s, they're going to be in their 80s. So I won't have an audience. So I said, what are the 20-year-olds listening to? How do I connect with them? How do I connect with my own generation? So I asked myself, well, what do I like? And I had at that time I had become a big fan of the Beatles and Bob Dylan and that sort of thing. Rock had become finally more sophisticated and more interesting to musicians, because instead of just being three chords, it now was more interesting. So that's really what was my motivation. I wanted to blend these influences that I was hearing in pop and rock music into our jazz world.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace reporting live here at the famed Blue Note here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank Gary Burton for his time, as well as the staff here at the Blue Note. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column, as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Peace.